Our next inductee is one of Rochester's best-known media figures ever, Mr. Jack Palvino.
Here at the Jack Palvino Show.
Jack Palvino, one of Rochester's best-known media figures, has had a legendary 40-year career in broadcasting. He admits he is one of the luckiest men in the business.
If you love what you do in life, you never have to work a day in your life. And I feel I have not worked a day in my life.
For 20 years during the golden days of radio, Jack was one of the area's dominant radio personalities.
It's 8:15 on the Jack Palvino Show.
Jack graduated from the pioneer class of St. John Fisher College and went to the University of Buffalo Law School. But then, the radio bug bit him.
The beauty of radio, to me, is the theater of the mind. And it's always been very exciting to me.
Back in Rochester, Palvino's first job was the voice of 3 different DJs at WSAY. He was then hired as morning DJ in Geneva by program director Bob Keeve, who would become his mentor.
Bob was and is wonderful to me. And I've always viewed him as a guy who has been my guru.
Jack's career skyrocketed as Keeve promoted him to Utica and then to Rochester's WBBF, one of the most popular radio stations in the country. Palvino in the Morning was the dominant morning show for almost 2 decades.
The audience know if they can trust you or not. And I always felt I would treat my audience as they were members of my family.
In 1978, John met Bud Wertheimer, and they formed the Lincoln Group. WVOR in Rochester was the first station they purchased.
There were 6 employees. We were rated number 15 in a market of 13 stations.
The results were unprecedented. Within 4 months, the station rocketed to #1 place in the ratings, and within 2 years, it became the #1 billing station. It was the subject of the book, In Search of Excellence.
We decided we're going to act quickly, and that was one of the philosophies that our company was built upon. I do believe teamwork is the key. We wanted everyone to be involved. Thank you.
Glad to have you here.
Good to be back, I'll tell you that.
We miss you around here.
Well, I miss this place. This is a favorite station, really. This is the special one. This has a special place in my heart.
The Lincoln Group became a multi-market group of stations located throughout the eastern and central U.S. and several upstate New York stations, including WHAM in Rochester. Every station they bought became successful.
Of all the stations, this is the special one, 1180 WHAM. This place has a legacy which is absolutely unique, and it's a wonderful, wonderful memory. Love Wham.
The Lincoln Group was also on the forefront of significant changes in the broadcasting industry when, at the request of the FCC, they drafted what was to become the 1996 Telecommunications Act.
A couple of weeks later, we got the verdict and it was all in Bud's words.
The Lincoln Group's success was remarkable, and for 20 years, Jack and Bud led the way.
And it's always a thrill for me to come back and just see the people and what changes they've made. And it's proof again that I still do, even at age 80, love radio.
Now retired and living on Lake Ontario, Jack's first book, On the Air, is in its 3rd printing. He is the co-founder of WHAM in Rochester and the founder of the Jack Palvino Excellence in Communications Award at St. John Fisher College.
I'm very proud that we've helped the markets that we've broadcast in to achieve things that they wouldn't have if we weren't there.
You cut that guy off. He gets mean when he
And now it's my pleasure to introduce to you one of my best friends in the world, really, and one of my idols from a very young age, one of my mentors, and my sidekick in the Rochester Radio Roadshow, Mr. Jack Palvino.
Thank you, Tom. Thank you. It's great to be here with all the Proietis and Marinos. This is like Old Home Week. And it's Old Home Week because I was brought up in Arundecoy.
Yeah.
Born at 303 Laurelton Road. Spent time at Bud Stephanie's mobile station at Culver and Merchants.
And by the way, Bud Stephanie's son, Bill, was one of my best students ever
Was
at
he?
St. John Fisher.
Yeah,
Yes,
great
of course.
family.
Yeah.
And your best friend? Yeah,
Oh,
Pat
Pat
Steph-
Stephanie, that's right. Oh, my- thank God. And
And
Mrs. Stephanie was a patient of
a
Dr.
patient
Marino.
of chicks. How about that? And when I wasn't there, was at Julie Underhill Station.
Yeah.
Underhill on top of the hill, on Empire Boulevard and Winton Road. And then our first home, we were married in 1960, was right around, well, at first we were in an apartment next door to Chick, Marino on Culver Road. We were in Dr. Ladico's apartment. And
Do you remember the house number on Culver?
No, I don't. I forget.
Ours was 1565.
1565.
Oh, is that what it was?
They were 1565.
I'll never forget it though. My now oldest son, John, who was in the clip, is the oldest salesman at Wham now. He's 55, and he cut his hand playing football, and we went to our neighbor, and our neighbor put him on the kitchen table and stitched up his hand.
And we all stood around
And
watching.
I was so grateful that Chick Marino was my neighbor. He's the best.
Now, one of the cool things for me was at 14 years old, I used to spend a lot of time at Uncle Chick and Aunt Mary's house on Culver Road. As all of them, we were always together. It was like they were like more like brothers and sisters to me.
Yeah.
And I'll never forget the day I came over and Uncle Chick said to me, he said, "You're not going to believe who our new neighbor is." I looked at him. I said, "Who? What?" He said, "Jack Palvino." At 14 years old, to have the guy who was the king of Rochester radio be the next door neighbor to my uncle. And then I'll never forget walking out with Mike and I think Sue, Whitey, and Pat. We walked out over to his house to see if he would come to the window. And he came outside and we all ran away. We were all afraid of him.
I was going to shave.
Did you shave before you went on the air?
Of course. I would go to work in a suit.
You used to wear
with
the
a tie.
Yeah, with a tie every day.
Three-piece suit.
Three-piece
My
suit.
kids make fun of me now. And when I retired, there were 12 suits that none of them wanted. So we had to
They're
throw.
probably all too thin for
You
you.
know what we did the last day we left Ladico's apartment? There was a safe in the wall that we could never open. So I said to Dr. Ladico, who was our landlady, I said, "Would you mind?" I said, "I know whatever's in there is yours, but I'd like to see if there's anything in that safe." So I called a client of ours who was in the safe business, and we got all excited, went upstairs in the back, and opened this huge safe. Took 3 of us to open the door. Empty.
Kind of the story of your life.
That's the whole story of my coulda, woulda, shoulda.
So we're gonna go back to the beginning. At what point did you realize that you were infatuated with radio? Do you remember the first voices you heard?
Well, I did. I always loved radio. When I was at Aquinas and at St. John Fisher, of course, but
Well, again, while you were at Aquinas, you graduated
I
from
was
Aquinas
at
in
Aquinas.
51, right?
yeah,
Okay.
I was graduated in 51 at
So
Aquinas.
who's the biggest radio name in 1951?
Oh, Eddie Meath was the biggest at that time, and Foster Brooks was also very
Right.
big. He was the great morning man on Wham, and so Dick Calabrese, who passed away recently, his folks own Calabrese Bakery on Culver Road. Wonderful cougars, wonderful cougars.
No, and you never ate any of those.
Of course not.
Okay.
But his dad would invite us down to the basement of his home to play poker and other things. And Dick would set up a tape recorder, and I would say, "Let me do some commercials for your bakery."
Oh, now see, this one you never told me.
I know.
That's not in the book.
I can't
either.
tell you everything. It's on a need-to-know basis. Yeah.
Yeah.
And so
So you actually did some commercials?
I did. They never went on the air because he wouldn't buy any time.
Oh, you were trying to sell them
I was trying to sell them. So Dick Calabrese, a wonderful guy, married Marcia Wesley, and his dad was a wonderful guy too, who loved the horses. And no matter what he did, his wife would never know what happened. He would come home, and after we're playing poker in the cellar, his wife saying, how'd you do? He said, I won a couple bucks. That could be anything from 5 to 10,000. If he lost, it's, how'd you do? He said, I lost a couple bucks. He would never give exact amounts. It could be 5 or 10,000
Yeah,
too.
right.
So we got very close.
And Terry went to see.
Brother Bob is our neighbor.
Really? Oh, wonderful guy.
Nice family, too.
Bobby, you say hello to him.
Yeah.
Yeah,
So
love the
tell me about-
Calabrese family.
So once you heard these idols,
Yeah, once
Did
I
you
did,
have
I
it-
said, you know, I really like that because I enjoy listening to the radio a lot. And I said, skip the first grade at St. Ambrose School.
smart ass.
Yeah, because I could read. My mother loved to force me to read books. And so at St. Ambrose School, the good nuns said, well, you're going to be a half year in the first grade and the second half in the second.
Nice.
And so since then, I always enjoyed reading and talking. And when I got into Aquinas and later on to Fisher, I was always just attracted by the magic of radio because it's such a theater of the mind that it creates things you can't create with TV. You're limited in the scope of your TV screen and what the producers can do. And I mentioned this to Don Elhart. He said he agrees because he started out in radio too. And it was for the same reason.
Yep.
But I've always loved radio, and we used it. The era that I was blessed to work in was totally different than where we are now. There were none of these. There were no iPhones. There was no TV. We had a 10-inch black and white TV with rabbit ears, 2 stations.
Yeah.
That's all we could pick up.
And those 2 stations were only on a few hours a
And
day.
they weren't on all the
Yeah,
time.
right.
Right. So there wasn't anything going on. No internet, no iPhone.
And even a telephone was kind of a difficult
We had
thing
a
to
party
make.
line.
Party line, right.
Butler 8 was the party line in Irondequoit.
Yeah.
That was, so this, the two
We
main.
were Hopkins 7.
Were you Hopkins 7?
2331.
Yeah.
We were Hopkins 7 2331.
Were you?
We were not, but Grandma Prietti was Congress, wasn't she?
Oh, yeah, those were the days.
Yeah,
And
yeah.
you had to wait in case someone was on the line.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
Or listen, that's
Everybody knew everything about everybody.
that's true.
Yeah.
So you went through St. John Fisher College. What was your major there?
History and pre-law.
So pre-law, and you were accepted at University
yes,
of Buffalo Med School.
University
Law
of
School.
Buffalo Law School. My brother was the attorney.
Yeah, talk a little bit about Larry.
Yeah, well, Larry was, he was my idol. Outstanding guy, little All-American football player at the U of R. The only reason he got in was because he could play football, which he was.
Yeah, because they didn't want
He was-
Italians
they
at
didn't
that time. He knew.
He was the first one on the football
On
team.
the football team, the first Italian.
In the medical school, if you lived in Rochester, 1 Italian
Yeah.
and 1 Jewish boy.
Is that right?
That's what they did. A quota. Yeah.
Yes,
1950.
Yeah, that's
1950.
so.
Yeah, and Larry was there that's right, in the 50s. I'll never forget the.
Well, how old would Larry be today?
Well, he would be 5 years younger
years
than
younger,
me,
yeah.
so he'd be 77,
77.
if he were still alive today.
Yeah, he's closer to my age. Than
Yeah, he close. And he was really a great attorney, real
He was
estate.
great and a great guy. Too.
Yeah, and
actually, I think
how-
he was a nicer guy than you were.
Yeah, by far. But he had to sell the fact that after 2 years of law
Yeah,
school,
tell them- okay.
I got sick of it.
Tell
and
them-
I'm
tell them
sitting up there in a library. I guess we're at a library, a law library, on a Saturday night on Eagle Street, and I'm shepherdizing legal cases, and all my friends from Buffalo who are in the radio business, Danny Never, they're walking by with their girlfriends, and they all got the poodle skirts and the ponytails. And I said, where are they going? They're going to a record hopping. He said, I belong with them. I do not belong in this library. So I went home and I told my brother, Larry, I'm quitting law school. He said, oh my Lord, we're dead.
Now, why did he say that?
Because he knew how strongly my parents wanted me to be the second attorney in the family, Larry and me. Okay. So I was his first client. And he said, I was his first client. Dad, he said to my mother and my father, now I know this is going to sound crazy to you, but I want you to listen. Let Jack go his own way. He doesn't want to be a lawyer. He wants to spin records. My father said, what are you, crazy?
Your father didn't even think they were going to pay you, right?
Oh, no. He said there was nothing involved at all. So my mother was even worse. So it depended on Larry. God bless him. He sold my case, and finally they said, okay, we'll let you try it for a year, see how it goes.
So this was 1957? Yeah.
1957.
So your first radio job, where did you apply, and what made you think anybody would even want to listen to you?
I didn't have the faintest idea, to be quite honest, Tom. But everybody at that time started at what is now the public station, WXXI 1370 AM, which then was WSAY, and was owned by Gordon Brown, a brilliant engineer.
And a very strange man.
And a very, very strange man who wouldn't let us use our own names. So I was Jerry Jack in the morning. And if I stayed on the air, say at 9 o'clock, I would say, it's 9 o'clock, have a good day, this is Jerry Jack. Now, if the guy after me didn't show up, I'd say, it's 9:02. This is Mac McGuire. Welcome. Same voice. If I stayed on at 3 o'clock, if I stayed at till noon, it's 12:03, this is Mike Melody. Yeah. Same voice. Gordon Brown felt that if any announcer left, no one would know if they kept the names the same. But I'm still grateful to this day, because without that start, I could never have gotten into broadcasting.
Now, Gordon went through trained an awful lot of people in the business. Can you name some of the other ones who famous people?
Mort Nussbaum, Gary Smith, Jerry Fogel, Mike Casella, Ferdinand J. Smith. Yeah. We all started there. None of us knew it because we couldn't use our own names.
By the way, Ferdinand J. Smith was Glenn Gordon at night. And one night, he decided to call himself something different. And this is how strict Gordon Brown was. So Ferdy, who's quite a classy, interesting guy, said, and this is Mr. GG. And it probably was like 11 o'clock at night. And Gordon got in his car, drove over there, and fired him right on the spot. And called somebody else to be in Glenn Gordon. And you know, after the song was done, there was a new voice for a new Glenn Gordon. And I think Ferdy went to GVA at that point too.
Yes, he did. Yes, he did.
So after SAY, well, no, tell us about what happened at SAY.
We had an unfortunate incident at WSAY.
You had a career of some unfortunate incidents.
Yes, I did. Okay. Well, Gary Smith, who's my good friend, and his brother, Todd, the Smith family from Pittsburgh, was my engineer at WSAY. I'm a big baseball fan. And so Todd said, you know, Jack, the World Series with the Yankees is on at the Pittsburgh Inn. And if you tape record tomorrow's program and just say 10 after the hour, 30 after the hour, and read tomorrow's weather forecast, which I could give you, we could go over to the Pittsburgh Inn and watch the Yankee game and have a couple of beers. And I'll put
This is 1957, New York Yankees against Milwaukee Braves.
Milwaukee Braves. So I said, that's a pretty good idea. So sure enough, we stayed late, we put the tape together, we put the tape on, and off we went to the Pittsburgh Inn to have our beer and watch the Yankee game and have lunch, and we were just two very happy guys. Funny thing happened. The tape broke. And when the tape broke, the owner, Gordon Brown, was very, very upset. And so he grabbed his car and he drove out to the transmitter and he wanted to yell at anybody he could find. But unfortunately, there was no one there. So the next day we were called into the office and he said, gentlemen, you are going to have a little different type of leave. We call it termination leave. So I go home, I said, now what do I do? Get a phone call from the late Uncle Eddie Meath. He said, Jack.
Just for perspective, though, how much was Gordon paying you at SA?
67.5 cents an hour with no
benefit.
Overtime.
Yeah, no overtime, no benefits.
No benefits.
67.5
Yeah.
cents an hour.
And the toilet behind the studio would flush in tune with the time checks. So that was our time check. And my first program was actually the Family Rosary for Peace, and Father Chirincioni was interrupted by a flush while doing the rosary. So I had a lot of incidents over there.
Yeah, he was almost excommunicated for that. So.
Yeah, it was close.
So you get fired from SAY, and Eddie Meath calls you.
And he called and said, hey, Jack, I hear you got a problem. I said, well, a little bit. He said, he said, I just heard from my friends that Geneva's looking. So Jack Friel and I gave him your name if you can get down there and interview for the job. I said, thank you, Uncle Eddie, God bless you. So I went down to Geneva, interviewed with the man I still respect most in the whole world, Bob Keeve. He was the manager.
And the radio station was?
And the radio station was WGVA, Geneva. And it was owned by Maury Foreman, owner of the B. Foreman Company. And the ladies, I'm sure, remember that wonderful place.
She used to work for him, I think. Did you work for the Foremans? No, you worked for. She worked for National.
Oh, okay.
I was one of their favorite customers.
You're one of their favorite customers.
Yes.
Oh, I'm sure you were.
Yeah. Maury was a big baseball fan, so he designed his company the way a baseball outfit does. So he had the minor leagues for the rookies like us. You'd start at GVA Geneva, and then you'd go to TLB Utica, and then if you got good enough, you'd come to the majors, BBF Rochester. So I went to Geneva with Mike Casella, great voice, and I had the morning show, 6 to 9. Mike did 9 to 12. I did 12 to 3. Mike did 3 to 6. You see how this is going, right? And then I come back at 6 at night. It was a daytime. The two of us were the station.
But this was a radio station that we used to call daytimers.
Yeah.
So they would come on at sunrise and go off at sunset. And the reason they did that was to clear out the airwaves overnight, just actually for national emergencies, for one thing,
Right,
national security, but also to clear out for radio stations like WHAM and KQED and KDKA and WFAN out of New York, WABC out of New York City, so that farmers could get the reports in the morning before the sun came up. And we'll tell you a little bit more about farm reports because that's a whole other interesting side.
Right.
So
But
here you are, you got hired at GVA.
We got hired at GVA.
And you're working with Mike.
You're working with Mike.
And you're living where?
We're living on the Kashung shores of Seneca Lake.
Yeah, I would say Mike knows that. Yeah.
Owned a cottage right there.
Well,
His buddy owned a cottage there.
Our buddy owned a cottage, so we rent.
You know Bob Cass?
Yes.
Retired police officer.
Retired police.
Yes. I used to fish with him all the time.
Well, the guy who rented us our cottage was Carmen Basilio.
Oh my God.
The great boxer, yeah.
And Mike and I, we didn't like to do housework. So
Wait till you hear this.
we didn't wash two things, dishes and laundry. So we buried them. And instead of getting new things, we would bury them in the front yard. Carmen Basilio came by, said, "You are the worst tenants I have ever had, and you are out of here." So we left Carmen's cottage and went to Dr. Ray Dewell's apartment. He was a pediatrician in Geneva, and I roomed with Jerry Sherwin, who's known as Jerome Isaacson, who was engaged to a young lady for 9 years, and she got a little tired and left him. Of waiting for, he had trouble with decisions.
Jerry had commitment problems.
Yeah, right.
Commitment issues.
So we caught a cold one day, so Dr. Dewey said, come on down, have my nurse give you a shot. So I went down there, and I looked down, and there's this little blonde nurse that said, "You drop your pants, please." And I dropped my pants. I looked, I said, "That's a pretty nurse. She's got blue eyes, too." And so she gave me the shot. Well, we've been cheek to cheek for 56 years. 3 children and 8 grandchildren. That's how I met my wife.
And where is she? You said
she's here. I don't know where she's looking for a book.
She thinks it's B.
Yeah,
Foreman.
she's heard it before.
Yeah, she has heard it before.
Yeah. So that's where I met Joyce.
So you were on the air at WGBA.
Yes.
How much did you learn about radio while you were at GBA?
I learned a lot because we were the only people on the air. We did everything. We had to be the engineers. We had to wash the windows. We cleaned everything. So
you wouldn't clean your apartment, but
we wouldn't clean the apartment. But when you're paid, it's different, you know.
Yeah.
So, well, we were there for a while, and those were in the old Sampson Air Force Base days. Yeah. So that was a lively city, and we were called on because a fellow who was the morning man in Rochester, Jerry Fogel, decided to go to California, to Hollywood, to be in pictures. His father owned the Webster Theater, and so he had contacts in showbiz, and he said, hire my son, and they did. He was in My Mother the Car, and
it was several movies.
Several movies he was in.
How many of you remember Jerry Fogel?
You remember him? Yeah. Good guy.
And he was a great guy. Yeah.
Great guy. Went to West Point. Yep. There are only 2 of us remaining, 3 of us. Jerry Fogel, me, and Ed Musicus. That's it.
Wow.
Yeah. In 1960, Jerry took off, and Bob Keeve called me and said, I want you up here Monday morning, 6 o'clock, you're on the air for Jerry. I said, that's great, Bob. There's a little problem, though. He said, what's that? I said, I'm being married the Saturday before. And he said, well, no problem. He said, we have a trade deal with the King Edward Hotel in Toronto. You and Joyce go up there for 24 hours and then get back here. So that was that. That was our honeymoon. And so up we went to do the morning show.
What was it like the first morning you went?
Petrified.
What time did you have to be there?
Had to be there at 5 o'clock.
Wow.
And I was the only one on the road, remember it well. And and so
And very nervous?
Yeah, I was very nervous, as a matter of fact, because it was, like anything in life, fear of the unknown. I always felt confident when the mic went on, but before the mic goes on, you see what could go wrong. And then I ran into the most comedic character I've ever known in my whole life, who was a guy named Engineer Donald Ariano. And he got me laughing so hard that I just forgot my nervousness. Yeah. And Don would collect excerpts, lines from CDs, comedy albums, and put them on a disc. And he was like a ventriloquist. He didn't like to be on the air, but he could shoot these lines at me.
Drop-ins.
Yeah.
Drop-ins.
They're drop-ins.
Yeah.
And it would be like I was talking to somebody, but it wasn't anybody there. He would play these machines, and he had me laughing so hard. My first break coming out of 6 o'clock in the morning, and he's talking, who's the funny-looking kid on for Jerry? And all this, and I stopped being scared because he got me laughing so hard. And he really is one of the keys to my 20-year career.
And he really invented the concept of a drop-in.
He invented it.
If any of you still listen to somebody like Howard Stern or these big radio stars of 2016,
yeah,
they are still using that tactic. But Don, there was nobody better than Don. And one of my favorites was he used to take almost everything from Don Rickles.
Don Rickles.
Yeah. Jack would say something, and you'd hear Don Rickles' voice come on and say, "You hockey puck, do you know what you're talking about?"
Right. Yeah.
And how many times did you hear that in your ears?
Oh, a million. And then he said, say, what's the reaction of the audience? And he'd come back with Don Rickles. The reaction of the audience is find a tree and hang him. And then we would have some pretty big guests. We had President Carter in there.
You had
We
Bill Cosby.
We had Bill Cosby. He broke up Bill Cosby
Yeah.
because he used Bill's own voice
Yeah.
against Bill. And he said, "You klutz, you can't even see through your cigar smoke." And that was Bill Cosby's voice talking to Bill Cosby. It knocked him out.
Yeah, he
Cosby
didn't know. He
was
said,
laughing so hard.
He said, "I don't know how this is happening."
He said, I can't talk anymore. And the same thing with President Carter.
Yeah.
We had, when President Carter came in, he asked for a request. Well, he's president, so I got to play the song. The Allman Brothers, Traveling Man. So, okay, I said, I'll play the record. Allman Brothers, Traveling Man. And it was, Don then hits him with the voice of President Carter.
Talking to him.
Yeah, saying, "That's the dumbest song I ever heard." It's President Carter's own voice.
Didn't it turn out the Allman Brothers were his neighbors?
And they were his neighbors.
In
so
Georgia.
they were his biggest.
So he was a big fan.
He was a
of-
big fan.
And tell them about President Carter wasn't really interested in you.
He couldn't care less. But he was a brilliant man. He graduated from the Naval Academy, and he was a technician in engineering. He went back with Engineer Donald, and those two were like two honeymooners explaining dials to each other back in our engineering room. So Carter had a wonderful time, but mostly because of Engineer Donald.
And
not me.
where was Rosalind during this?
Shopping at B. Foreman Company.
with a group of Secret Service men.
Whole
around
group of Secret Service guys, and she loved it. Said the best stop she ever made was Midtown Plaza because she shopped, and that was
So, while your BBF days, 1960 till 1978?
78. Yeah.
78.
Yeah.
You had, November 22nd, 1963, we're getting close to an anniversary.
Oh yes.
Now, you did a lot of great, funny times on the radio, and for the most part, radio was a lot of fun for you.
Yes.
November 22nd, 1963, what happened?
Well, that was the day President Kennedy was shot. And I was on the air at 10 minutes before 2 o'clock, and I had just played an Amil submarine shop. And the spot, and Bob Keeve, my manager, came in and said, kill the spot, kill the music, go downstairs to the record shop and get some Mozart. So we played Bach and Mozart music for 3 consecutive days. Nothing was interrupted except the news bulletins coming from Texas. And I've never seen anything like Midtown Plaza that weekend. It was a most somber place. People were crying in the mall and around the clock, the Midtown clock. It one of the most memorable days of my life.
Did you stay on that weekend too?
Yes, we stayed.
You
We
came
all-
in for the weekend too,
We
right?
stayed, yeah. We just stayed.
Nobody ever left.
Nobody left. We all stayed at the studio.
Wow.
Yeah.
What other great people did you have come visit? Did
Oh.
Jimi Hendrix come to visit you?
No, I did Jimi Hendrix on the. I was MC for
You were
his show.
MC for the show.
Yeah, he was a character.
Yeah, he was a
Yeah.
yes, he was a character. And
Wow.
you did some other great shows too.
Oh
right?
yeah, we did the Beach Boys. We did Ray Charles.
Yeah.
Did any of you see Ray? The movie.
The movie Ray.
No.
If you have never seen the movie Ray,
did.
truly one of the best movies ever made, and the performance by Jamie Foxx as Ray Charles.
Yeah, it
He
was
won an
good.
Academy Award as Best Actor, and if you watch it, you'll be flabbergasted. He learned how to play the piano blind, the way Ray
Yeah.
Charles did, and his singing was spot on.
Oh, it
but
was.
tell them what it was like with Ray Charles.
Well, Ray Charles was at the Auditorium Theater with the Supremes. Diana Ross had left, so I was the MC. And there were 3 of us in the dressing room behind the stage. And Ray said to his manager, "Would you leave the room, please?" And he left. And then he said, "Mr. Jack, would you open the suitcase?" And I said, "Okay." He said, "How much money is in there?" And I said, "Well, I really don't know, but they're $100 bills and there's at least 5,000 in here." He said, "Okay, now we can go on with the show." And I never thought anything more about it. Now we saw the movie Ray. And I realized that his manager had been stealing from him, because he was blind, of course, at every stop. And so beginning with the Buffalo Rochester stops, he asked the MC of the show to count the money to make sure that he was going to get his money before he went on stage. So that was my memory with Ray Charles.
Now at BBF, you moved in to replace Jerry Fogel, which you didn't think was possible.
Yeah.
But you did okay.
Yep, we did okay.
And you were surrounded by some of the best talent. When we saw that video, we saw some of the names.
Saw the
right after you were on the air, who came on?
Musical Dean, Joe Dean.
Joe Dean.
He's just passed away last year in Florida. Yep. And Joe was great. And
but he was kind of stuck in midday, which is not
midday.
Not the hottest property.
No, but Nick Nixon was the best, the old professor. He just passed away last year at 92.
Yeah, actually, we did a show with Nick Nixon in attendance.
Yes, we did.
About a month before he passed away.
Yeah, at his place where he was living.
At his, right, his
I'm so happy we did that,
Yeah,
too.
it was great.
Yeah, he had the highest ratings that anyone has ever had in Rochester radio, ever.
And you could make a case, the highest ratings per capita of any radio performer in history in the United States.
In 1960, the Pulse people took a survey of, and it's in the book and it's also on the clip, in the whole country, BBF's ratings were not only #1 in Rochester or New York State, but in the whole country. So no one had a more popular radio station than we did here in Rochester per capita. In the whole country, we were so hot.
Well, didn't at one point Nick have like 82%?
Yes, 85% of the people
85%
were listening to him. And the reason was he would play all the rock and roll songs, and people would vote, mostly teenage girls. And
anyone here remember voting? I know my wife voted.
And we had student bee reporters who would tabulate the votes. And then every afternoon, Nick would play the top songs, ending with the #1 song at 7 o'clock. If he did not sell a car within 10 minutes at Holman Chevrolet on that show, it was an upset. He sold more cars for Heinrich and Holman and all those people. He was golden. Yeah. And Nick would go out and knew everybody, and everybody knew him. In fact, he used to do record hops at Willow Point Park in Webster.
This is a great sidelight to Jack Palvino.
And I said, Nick, why do you go out to Webster? He said,
on a Friday night.
On a Friday night. Yeah. He said, you busy? I said, no. He said, why don't you come out Friday night? So I went to Willow Point Park. We go out there, a couple hundred youngsters with Freddie Boom Boom Cannon, the star, singing Palisades Park. He's lip-syncing the record. And I said, this is nice. So we go out there about 8 o'clock. About 10 o'clock, we wrap up. And I see the manager come over, and he starts peeling bills off to Nick. I said, Nick, how much did you just make? He said, about 500. This is 1960. I said, I'm starting record hops next week, Nick.
Now, another thing about Nick, too, was at that time we had just kind of gotten ourselves into the payola scandal.
Oh, yeah.
Could you talk a little bit about what happened, well, especially for Nick, but it also even happened to you, too, right?
Yeah, well, the payola scandal was started by a guy named Alan Freed in Cleveland, where you would receive gifts if you played certain records. Things would show up. Bikes would be suddenly in your garage. And money would suddenly be, we did not.
Show up in an envelope, right?
Yeah, you'd open an envelope, and I said, wow, what's going on here? Well, we finally, we didn't get what the big guys got in the big markets. Finally, Congress had to outlaw it because it was clearly illegal. But we would get calls, you better play this record a lot, and then you would get a contribution.
Contribution, like a new bike in the kid's bike in the garage. Yeah.
And they would call. None of us, of course, took advantage of it, but it was a different era.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And Congress did outlaw that, by the way.
Yeah,
the whole payola thing.
Payola was outlawed, and it should have been.
Yeah.
And following Nick, of course, was Mr. Lee, Leon Marguerite, biggest man in nighttime radio. 300-pounder who ate a Philadelphia
Cheesesteak.
sandwich with double onions every night.
Garlic,
and
too.
Garlic, and we couldn't even get into the studio in the morning. It smelled so bad from the night before. And he had one of those things every single night.
Did Leon hand off to you in the morning?
No, Bill DeMars,
Bill
the
DeMars,
man of
that's
a
right,
thousand voices.
Man of a thousand
He
voices.
was on all night.
That's right.
And you talk about talent, Bill DeMars, boy, he was a run-y-quit guy.
Yeah.
And he would create from his head unscripted soap operas
Yeah.
all night. And he would create them. I said, how do you ever remember where you are? This is like the craziest soap opera. And people would listen, the Insomniacs would listen to how and then he'd play a little musical interlude, and then he'd get back to the soap operas.
He was amazing. Yeah.
It was an amazing station. And to this day, I get calls from people all over the country about roots in BBF. I'll never forget, there was one show that we had with the Beach Boys
Oh, yeah.
at the
Oh, that's in the book, too.
at the War Memorial. And so Dick Clark was the promoter of the show. Well, one of the Beach Boys didn't want to go into the military, so the police were after him to arrest him. So I get a call from Dick Clark, says, Jack, take the Beach Boys to the top of the Plaza Hotel. I got a room for you. Stay there till I call you, because we got to make sure things are okay. So for 2 hours, two of us sat up, the engineer Donald and I, sat in a private room at Jim Foley's top of the plaza, and we were serenaded. Most wonderful 2 hours I may have spent my whole life by the Beach Boys, a cappella.
Fantastic.
And then we get a call from Dick Clark. His lawyer has just said he'll agree to go to the armed forces. So Chief Lombard came over and said, show can go on, Jack. I said, okay. And that's how we did the Beach Boys.
What was the least? I mean, you and Bud promoted a lot of programs, a lot of concerts.
Oh yeah.
What was your biggest success?
Our biggest mistake.
No, your biggest success first. What was the?
The biggest success, I would say, would be the biggest success, probably Jimi Hendrix.
Oh yeah, really?
Yeah, because he was so popular, crazy on stage.
And he cut across all audiences.
All audiences. It was underground music.
Well, you never told me this one here.
Yeah. He came in with a suitcase. Inside the suitcase was a TV set. I said, you know, we're Rochester, but we have TV here. And then he had his bottles of booze, and then he had some bags with some funny stuff in them. And he got on that stage, and I've never seen a man who could just physically do what he did out there.
He was hypnotic.
That was the best.
Yeah.
The worst
show ever.
Chuck Berry.
And not because of Chuck.
Not because of Chuck.
No.
Chuck was the best. We made the terrible mistake of scheduling his concert on Halloween night, trick or treat night. So Bud and I went up, and there were about, including Bud and I, 20 people in the War Memorial.
Think about that.
So, I went to the stage manager. I said, dim the lights. I don't want him to see how few people are out here, you know? And so Bud, my partner, and I, hands me a cigar. And he said, light it up. We're going to have a beer and a cigar. This is costing us 25 grand. We might as well enjoy it. And that was the night that we learned we're never again doing another concert on Trick or Treat night in Rochester.
Yeah.
But Chuck put on, to his credit, a great show, and he actually laughed about it.
He was a nice guy, too.
He was
yeah.
a nice guy, and he said, it's a good thing you kept the lights out, I would have left.
He said he would have left the stage. So now, how good were your ratings in the morning at BBF?
They were good.
Like
yeah,
what?
They were good.
60?
Yeah, they were 60s.
60.
50 and 60s.
This means 50% of all 50 to 60% of everyone listening to radio in the Rochester market were listening to him.
Well, because of
every morning.
The music was just coming in, the pop music.
Yeah.
And we,
Well, it was an interesting, I mean, rock
Right.
and roll saved AM
rock
radio.
and roll was, we played 40 records. I mean, you knew them by heart. You knew. we
Yeah,
used
if
to
you
cue
think
'em
about
up.
the concept of the top 40 came from the typical
Right.
jukebox could hold 40 records, so that was
Yeah.
where you got top 40 from. And then
Right.
also they had can you explain real quickly the A, B, and C rotation?
Oh, yeah, the most popular songs you'd play once every hour.
Right. That was called
Once
the A rotation.
A rotation. Second most popular, 2 hours, third, and so on. I mean, after a while, you knew every single song. And that was, I think, what accounted for the popularity. Then, like anything else, it's a copycat industry.
Right.
We were copied by 3 other stations quickly.
Yeah. But I have to tell you that he's being very modest here. The reason they were super successful, because they were being copied,
Yes.
it was personality radio. It was Jack Palvino, it was Joe Dean,
Yeah.
it was Nick Nixon in the afternoon. 82% to 85% of radios in the Rochester market tuned to Nick at any time. And by the way, for all 3 of you, it never went to their heads. These were still the nicest, kindest people who never became arrogant.
Our
about
boss
it.
made sure we kept a level head.
Yeah, talk more a little bit about
Because
About Bob Keeve.
Bob Keeve was an exceptional man. He wrote speeches for President Eisenhower. He's a Harvard graduate, and he was the manager of our radio. He's still working. He's 94 years old. He has the #2 station in San Jose, California, country. He called me last week. I said, Bob, you're still going in every day? He said, yeah, but I go a little later. I said, what time? He said, 10 o'clock. He said, it used to be he'd stay all day. Now, 10 to 5, he goes in. But he still goes in 6 days a week. And he's 94 years old. This is...
And he's a genius. He really is
The
a
man
genius.
was a genius. I still respect him. And I got to tell you that BBF was such a huge... It would have been easy to go to our heads, quite honestly.
Right.
Because we were bigger than life.
Oh, you were.
There were no other
There
people.
were-
We walked down
there were
the
no
street.
other local stars.
There weren't any local stars. There wasn't any TV and other stuff that was going on. So we would have a huge following.
Well, I'm the only one who could have matched you, really, at that time. Well, maybe Foster Brooks, but then
Right.
Foster left to go to Hollywood.
Right, he did.
Eddie Meath.
Eddie Meath
But
was...
tell them about Eddie's life. Eddie,
Oh, well, Eddie had a different life than anyone realized. Eddie loved poker, and he would play poker like all night, pretty much. And then he would...
every night.
And then he would go on and do his morning show, 6 in the morning. And then he'd go over to the Y to take his nap, and some of us would go over to play racquetball. We had to be quiet because Eddie's sleeping.
And he was everybody's hero.
You're right. But because of the huge popularity, people believed us.
Yeah.
And
Yeah, their credibility was...
our credibility was so high. So the Theater of the Mind on April Fool's Day 1960 was such that we decided to have some fun. And we said, we're going to bring to Rochester, first time in the world, electro-odoronics, a brand new technical invention, which will not only allow you to hear radio, but you are going to be able to smell it. So I said, we have the sound of equipment in the background whirring with sound effects going on, and we started the countdown, 60 minutes to count down. Call the fire department, get them on standby in case it explodes. We're getting our equipment ready. And so we counted 5 before 7 o'clock, 4, 3, 2, 7 o'clock is when most people listen to the radio, highest ratings. So then, boom, 7 o'clock, and we turned on this huge sound of a coffee pot percolating. And then I said, now, I want you who smell the coffee to call me. Sure enough, Mrs. Lavecchi, first caller for every
remember Mrs.
single
Lavecchi?
contest that we were ever doing. Jack, I'm Henrietta. I said, do you smell it? I'ma smell it. Mrs. Lavecchi, I said, I believe you, Miss Lavecchi. So we get a couple more ladies call in. Then I get a call from Hilton. Jack, this is Margaret from Hilton. I don't smell anything. So I said, Margaret, do you realize where you are? I said, you're right behind Chase Tower. We're at Midtown Tower. So the smell to get to you has to go around the Chase Tower. She said, oh, okay.
Didn't she call back a little while later?
She called back, yeah, it's all right now.
I smell it.
We did this for about an hour.
Yeah.
And they finally, we said, April Fools, everybody have a fun day. But that theater of the mind, we had so captured people that we were able to do stuff that never hurt
Well, you
anybody.
did it, the following year, you did the bacon smell, right?
We did the bacon smell, and then we did the phone routine.
Oh, this
Mrs. Lavecchi called and said she had staticky phone lines. So we said, okay, we got one this time. Said, want everybody to go get your shower caps and put the caps on both ends of the telephone. We're going to get a large fan and turn it on here at BBF, and we're going to blow the static out over the air to clear those phone lines. Same routine. Call the fire, make sure they're on standby. We're getting our machines ready to go. 9, 8, 7. We put the big sound of a big fan. Whoosh. Mrs. Lavecchi, thank you so much, Jack. Thank you so much. My lines are clear. This was the stuff we did at BBF
and
Radio.
you got paid for this.
And we got paid for that.
Yeah.
It is, I really, like I never worked a day in my
I have to
life.
interject something at this point, too. In 1968, I started teaching at St. John Fisher. And one of the things that the president at St. John Fisher asked me to do was, he said, we should probably introduce a new program. In fact, he used to tell me over and over again, he said, you have to help me make St. John Fisher College cool. Now, it was difficult to try to make St. John Fisher College cool because up until that time, it was an all-Catholic, all-male college. Mike remembers. And even the students had to wear ties and sport coats. And you couldn't take the sport coat off. And I used to tell Charlie, I'd say, it's very difficult to make St. John Fisher College cool at all. And he said, well, think of some programs that maybe we can do. And I said, well, one of the things we could do is, I just graduated from the Newhouse School at Syracuse. Maybe we could do a small version of that and have a communication major. And at first, Charlie was pretty much in favor of it, but our faculty was not. The faculty was mostly Basilian priests, and they were classical in tradition. They wanted to teach philosophy, religious studies, sociology, but something like communication didn't make any sense to them. In fact, frequently I would have one or two of them come up to my office and say, are you trying to turn us into a trade school? Because it seemed to them that it didn't make much sense. And I called on this guy a couple times and I said, can you help me convince them that this is something worthwhile? So you really did help me in that regard. The real coup that he pulled off for us was WBBF, Jack Palvino, was the first local radio station to take interns from St. John Fisher College. And once we placed our first intern at WBBF, that was the clincher that we had made it, that we had now. And it really convinced the faculty that this was something that was interesting, important, consequential, and that it could be combined. In fact, it was I think Jack and you and Father Kavanaugh came up with the idea of not just having a communication major, but all communication majors had to have a second major. So they had to be either a communication major and an English major, communication major and a philosophy major, and that seemed to placate. And by the time I left St. John Fisher in 1980, it was the largest major on campus. It had about 350 majors, and you hired an awful lot of my former students.
But Tom's very humble about it, but he founded the department and did a great job. And every place we go, and this is like our 25th or 6th stop here, one of his 20,000 students that he's taught at MCC, where he was King Carew over there for years.
King Carew. Or at St. John Fisher.
And Fisher as well. Yeah. He was the only guy who could get my son Jason through school. So he's got me blackmailed. That's why I do these. Because Tom said, I got him through. You said, all right.
Well, I had John, who was a great student. But as Jack said, John was very, very quiet. And then Jason came along, and Jason was more like my brother Whitey. Yeah, a little bit more of a handful. Jason probably wasn't really cut out for, especially a place like St. John Fisher. He probably would have been, you know, I was thinking about this the other day. In fact, I told him, he would have been a great phys ed teacher.
Yeah. It's hard to believe, but he's manager of safety and compliance at the bus company.
I know, and he's done a fabulous job.
So. Wonderfully happy.
But we did have to do we had to pull some strings to get Jason to graduate from St. John Fisher.
But the interning was fun. One of the interns that I remember hiring was a pretty blonde girl from Ithaca. And she was a terrific worker and pretty as all get out. And when she would light up, when the mic went on, or later when the TV camera went on, she would just light up. Her face would just, I would say, Jessica, you have to go into broadcasting. Well, that was Jessica Savage.
Yeah. Who ended up becoming, had a career as,
had a career.
She was on her way to probably replace Huntley Brinkley.
Yes.
But she was killed in a car accident at age 36. Between Philadelphia and New York City.
Yes.
She was driving to work with her husband.
In a rainstorm.
In a rainstorm.
And she had lunch with Ed Musicus, my partner, and I, 6 months before that.
Wow.
Yeah.
But you nurtured an awful lot of great talent.
It is such a kick, and I understand what you get out of teaching.
Yeah.
To develop young people and watch them come into their full bloom, and to develop, especially in broadcasting, where you sometimes view it as being crazy area, to being an area where you can hit home no matter what your roots are.
Right.
It doesn't necessarily matter whether your father was a plumber, as mine was, or he was a national broadcaster.
Didn't make any
It doesn't matter in the broadcasting business. The one thing I like about it is that talent usually wins.
Yeah.
And I'm just delighted to have been luckily involved in broadcasting for my whole life.
And your talent came through.
I loved it.
One
I
of the
still
things
do.
One of the things you did that most people don't understand how tricky this was. In 1978, Jack took a chance on FM radio. Now, for the young people here, this might be Joyce at the door.
Is that Joyce?
No? Okay. Oh yeah, tell him come in.
Tell him come in. Sure.
In 1978, Jack took a huge chance because FM radio had not caught on in the United States. It had caught on in other countries, but there was some talk that that some car companies were thinking now they were going to put AM/FM receivers in cars. And but the wedding between cars and radio has been spectacular since 1939. And if you go back and look at 1939 conversations, they're the same conversations we have about texting today. That car radios were too dangerous, too distracting, people were going to get killed. There probably is some truth to that. Texting's far more engaging than that. But tell them what you decided to do in 1977,
well,
78.
In 1978, I was in my mid-40s, and it's hard to be a teenage idol when you're in your mid-40s. So my boss, Bob Key, said, why don't you come out to California with me? I'm buying a station. I said, no, I don't want to raise my family in California. I want to raise them in Rochester. He said, okay, then look for a station in Rochester, and you can run that for me. And I said, all right, I'll start looking. And I ran into the Wertheimer family, who were thinking about selling WVOR-FM 100.5. And the son, young Bud, and I really hit it off. A Dartmouth graduate, bright as all get out, and we were just on the same page. Everything he suggested, I would give something that would tie in with, and same with me. And he said, Jack, well, instead of buying this for your partner in California, why don't we form a company? And so I said, yes, we'll form a company. And it was the Lincoln Group that we formed. And we purchased WVOR-FM. As I mentioned in the clip, it rated 15 in the market of 13 at the time.
Now, one of the brilliant things that he did, I'm going to interrupt because he would never take credit for this. He took the WBBF format and the WBBF crew and slid it over to FM. And there were people like me in the market. At that time, I started considering myself quite a scholar of what was going on in broadcasting. And I even said to him, I said, do you think this is going to work? Are people going to give up AM radio? Is WBBF AM going to stop having as many listeners? And he said, well, it's a chance I have to take. He said, and he used that line the first time I ever heard him say, it's tough in your 40s to be a rock star, and to be a teenage idol. So continue.
Well, we bought the station, and I said, we're going to try to put all of the AM features that made us successful on BBF on FM. It was mostly background music on FM at the time and hard rock music, like the music you hear in the elevators. So we put the helicopter traffic on FM, unheard of. A newscaster on FM, unheard of. Live broadcasts, which were around the clock, live people on the air. We played oldies. We played solid gold music. We formed the Heart of Gold Charitable Foundation, which helped people on a one-time only basis for anything not covered by any other charity. So we went on the air, and make a long story short, at the end of a year and a half, we were not only the top rated station in Rochester, but the top billing, thanks to our partner Ed Musicus, a great salesperson. And
truly one of the greatest gentlemen on the planet.
An incredible guy. So we had hit the top of the Rochester market, and it was an amazing thing that happened, because suddenly we were being copied all over the country, and people were calling us for what we're doing on FM radio. And they wrote a book about us, In Search of Excellence. It takes about 24 hours for an idea to get stolen in broadcasting. It's the way it works. But we ended up owning 8 stations, including WHAM, and it was something I could have never envisioned. It also was a gateway to meeting the most unforgettable character I've ever met, Dick Tobias. You may remember he was an outstanding newsman with great voice, and Dick was a free spirit. Let me put it that way.
That's an understatement.
I'll tell you one story. The others I can't tell you.
Not suitable for a mixed audience.
Not suitable.
Yeah, right.
But when you're on the air and you can go on a trip, if you can attract 15 people, you get 1 extra free seat on the trip. So being on the radio, we could get a lot of folks to go away with us. So we went on one of these trips, and we would go all over, down to Nassau. So we went to Nassau, and we landed, and as we landed, I noticed a long black limo came up the runway, and the fella got out with a golf cart and came running up. He said, Mr. Tobias, Mr. Palvino, would you be interested in playing golf? I said, well, sure, I'd love to. So we jumped it right in the golf cart. Joyce was with me, and so was Dick's female friend, and we went to the golf course and walked right through the people waiting on the tee, which I thought was a little embarrassing. And then we finished our 9 holes and went in, and we had a big lunch. They moved our table into the center of the whole dining room, moved everyone else away. And I said, I'm really impressed. Do you treat all of your guests this way? And he said, well, we certainly hope that you and Mr. Tobias will be very generous in your comments in Golf Digest about our golf course. He had called 2 weeks ahead and said, if you don't treat us well, there'll be hell to pay in the next issue of Golf Digest for your golf course. That was Dick Tobias.
But he was also a brilliant broadcaster.
A brilliant broadcaster.
Now, what was the worst controversy he ever caused you? Do you remember?
Oh, well, there were a lot.
I know there were.
But
you understood that he was really important
he was
to
really a
the
talent.
success.
Yeah, and he wrote great.
He was a great writer.
Kodak was very close with us, and at that time, Kodak was king in our market. Not the way it is today, but
No.
they would send their car for us when we did remote broadcast around the country. Disney was very, very bright. And rather than buying advertising, they invited the top 50 stations in the United States to come down to Orlando and broadcast free for a whole week, all expenses paid. And they got more publicity than they could ever pay for as a result.
Brilliant.
Kodak was down there with us, so they were very generous, the guys and gals at Kodak, and they would send their limo for us to get to the studio at 6 in the morning. Well, one morning, the car didn't show up. So Dick calls the Kodak suite at the hotel, wakes up the president of Kodak, says, "Where the hell's our car?" And that kind of ended our sweet relationship with the Eastman Kodak. So he was a handful, but a great guy and a great talent.
Yeah.
He's the only guy I've ever met who got into a fight with Santa Claus as our Christmas party at the top of the Plaza Hotel.
He clocked Santa Claus.
He had
Well, Dick used to drink a little bit.
he had an attraction to Manhattans.
Yeah.
Yeah,
But,
irresistible.
Now, something else that you did along the way was in the early to mid 1980s, you recognized the value of WHAM, even though at that time, as FM radio was taking off, a lot of us thought AM radio was going to disappear.
Right.
You didn't think so.
No, we didn't.
So,
yeah, we thought that the situation had been reversed. When we were successful with WBOR, one of the stations we had to beat was WHAM.
Right.
But then, after achieving the top, we found it was for sale. And so we said, now we're going to have to rebuild what we've just torn down.
Yeah.
So we purchased WHAM in 1986, owned it till 1996.
you actually purchased WHAM and WHFM.
And WHFM. Yeah.
But you couldn't keep HFM.
We couldn't keep it.
You owned WVOR.
And
At that time.
At that time, you couldn't do that. And Foster Brooks didn't believe that anyone was listening.
Tell them about Foster.
The WHFM. So he had a bet. The story goes with Slattery, $100, said, "I'll bet you no one's listening to HFM." And so Jack took his bet, and he said, "Well, what are you going to do?" He said, "Well, I'm going to swear on the air at 12 noon on WHFM, and I bet we don't get any calls." So sure enough, it comes up 12:05, 12:10, 12:15.
And Jack Slattery was listening to Dick Tobias do this cursing. It was 10 minutes of cursing over and every possible word you could ever imagine. Every curse word.
Yeah.
And Jack Slattery is sitting there listening to it going,
And no calls.
Nobody's
Nothing
calling.
happens. Well, what he didn't tell him was that he had called the chief engineer about 10 minutes ahead and said, "Make sure you turn this switch off just a little before noon. I got to take some readings." So it never got out on
So
the
that
air.
was not on the air. But Jack Slattery did pay Dick Tobias, or Foster Brooks, $100.
That's one of the great things about this business, the characters in the business. When George,
and it's the characters who are keeping it alive today, too.
yeah, that's true.
Yeah.
There are very few, but it I hope goes back that way. I mean, Slats would like George Hafner's script, reading the apple prices every morning, and he would be talking through smoke. And no one, it's radio, no one can see what you're doing.
This is the farm report.
This is the
Jack
farm report
Slattery
at 5:30.
and George Hafner. Jack Slattery used to torture. George Hafner was the straightest guy on the planet.
Greatest guy ever.
Jack Slattery, he called himself the world's
tallest midget.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Which you couldn't say on the air today. But
Yeah. Well, as a matter of fact, to tell you how times have changed, remember David Sennett, you remember
Yes,
on
David A.
WH,
Sennett,
David
yeah.
A. Sennett, great voice.
Yeah.
He was asked to leave by Mr. Rust, who owned the station before us, because his closing line was, "Put the ice cubes in the glass, Mama, I'm coming home."
I'm coming home. And he was asked to leave for that.
And he got fired for that.
Yeah. And now,
Times have changed.
think about the stuff Howard Stern says.
Yeah, right. It's amazing.
So what did you do with Wham? How did you get Wham back
Well, what
into
we
the
first
fold?
did with Wham when we got there is realize he shouldn't be playing music, first of all. What people want is news from Wham. 50,000 watts, I hear them all over the world. So we went right back to a pure news format. We hired Rush Limbaugh. We were the second in the country to hire him. Cost us $1,000 for the year. I hear his prices have gone up a little.
His prices have gone. 5 years later, Rush Limbaugh was $80,000 a year.
We had Larry King on all night. We brought him in for a special. He stayed at the Strath Allen. He asked my friend, head musicus, "Do you have any 24-hour pharmacies?" And he said, "Yeah, I think we do." He said, "Get me some hairspray, will you?" I said, "Larry, it's radio." And he went out.
It's midnight.
It's midnight. So, but Eddie went out and got him his hairspray. I knew then he was a TV guy. He was going to go there no matter what. And so we went into a strong news format and rebuilt the station. And I really still have the greatest affection for Wham because it's so powerful. We used to listen to it in Florida without internet.
You heard it in London, too.
I heard it in London, England, because it skips. AM signals skip off the ionosphere, and they come down. That's what happens. In fact, well, okay, one closing story. I don't want to hold you too long.
We got a couple more minutes.
The Fidel Castro regime didn't like the Voice of America broadcasts coming out of Miami in 1992. And so they jammed with their huge transmitters the AM signals of American stations. The one they jammed was Wham. Yeah. We couldn't hear us beyond Scranton, Pennsylvania. Mm-hmm. And we said, an engineer was going crazy. He said, what's happening? Our signal's gone. So we had to go down to Florida and try, it took us a year, to talk to the Cuban government to get Fidel to turn off those transmitters so the Wham signal could be heard. And it took us a year to get things under control. And a lot of governmental help with people on both sides of the aisle.
I'll say Frank
Horton helped us a lot.
Very much involved. Frank Horton asked me to write a letter that they could use to send off to the Cuban government. And he said, it has to come from an academic. He said, they won't trust anybody in politics. They won't trust the owners. He said, so could you write a letter that we could send to Fidel Castro and say, it's really important that people in the United States be able to hear WHAM.
Right.
And we never got a response, but like about a week later, the switch got flipped in the right direction, and all of a sudden the signal was being carried again.
Yeah. One of the things that I did was to write the book on the air. And if you don't have a copy, they're $10. All the proceeds go to the Fisher Excellence in Communication Scholarship Fund. So it all goes to charity. But if you'd like one, I'd be happy to sell you one. And I thank you very much.
It's been a spectacular career for this guy, and I love doing this show with him.
Thank you.
Are there any questions? Yeah, please, fire away. Janie.
You said that your parents said, we'll give you a year.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Do you have a point after that year that they wanted to talk to you on how it was going, or was it already evident?
It was pretty evident.
Yeah.
Yeah.
In a year.
Even in a year.
That's a great question.
Good question. No, I was so enraptured by the business.
And they could tell you loved it.
And they could, well, I'll give you one example. I would do the morning show in Geneva, New York, and then Mike would come on, then I would do 12 to 3. Well, I would get a call some days at 3 or 3:30 that Leon was sick or couldn't make it in for the night show on BBF. So I would drive to BBF and I would work the 7 to midnight show on BBF after working from 6 to 3.
And then drive back to Geneva.
And driving.
And be on the air the next morning.
And I couldn't have been happier. Yeah. Of course, I was a lot younger.
I would love to hear, I wish Joyce was in the room, because I would love to hear Joyce's take on...
Yes.
Because tell them what happened when you announced that you were going to be, you told Joyce you were going to be staying home from...
Oh, yeah. When I retired in 1997, because they just made us an offer we couldn't refuse, and so we sold, and I can't believe it'll be 20 years, January 1st.
I just thought about it. I just thinking the same thing.
Who bought the company? Who bought it?
CBS Radio.
CBS Radio, yeah.
Yeah.
And then later on, Clear Channel bought it from CBS.
Right, Clear Channel bought from them. The minute I got home, the day after retiring, I said, I was kidding a little bit. I said, well, now Joyce, we could spend 24 hours together every day of the week, and she started to hyperventilate. So then the phone rang, and it was my old friend from Fisher, Bob Brown. He said, Jack, we want to put a Catholic radio station on the air. Can you help it? And Joyce said, yes. So they had the manager's chair already for me. So I went over there, and in 2000, we put WHIC on the air, 1460. And I'm happy to say it's on the air today, and it's breaking even. And it even has FM at 92.9. And we did that to keep me out of Joyce's hair during retirement and to keep Catholic radio on the air in Rochester.
Yeah, good job.
What happened to Beth and Chet? Well,
I don't know what happened to Chet.
I can give you the update on Chet. But
Beth is at XXI. She's working at WXXI.
she's the morning person
Morning
on
person.
WXXI AM. And
Doing
she's
news
excellent.
there.
She's outstanding.
She's
She
a
went to
nice
Florida
lady.
for 1 year, and she didn't like the summertime.
Right.
It was too hot. And plus she realized her family's from Buffalo. Her real name is Beth Adolph.
Oh, yeah, we changed her name.
Yeah.
We said, you're not going to be Beth Adolph. Adolph is not a good name for you.
Not post-World War II.
Post-World War II, we're not going to do this. So we said, you're Beth Adams.
And by the way, if you've ever met Beth, Donna and I are
She's a
good
sweetheart.
friends. This is like one of the finest human beings on the planet.
Yeah.
And then Chet took a buyout from Wham, right after Beth left. And what Clear Channel got themselves into a lot of debt, buying way more radio stations than they ever should have bought. And what they had to do is start getting rid of these really high-paid personalities, because I don't know what Chet or Beth was making, but they were making well into six figures at the top of their games. And the numbers keep going down in radio. Somebody like Brother Weeze used to have 40% of the radio audience listening to him in the morning. Now he has 15%. And the radio audience is about 80% smaller than it was at Jack's peak.
Different era.
It's a different era, and radio's still important, but it's changed, and people are spending their time in other places. Tony.
I don't know all the stations and everything, but there's some certain characters on Legends 92.7 in the
Yes.
evening when I listen to them.
Yes.
And I just like them.
Yeah.
They have funny shticks that they do, and someone calls in who's just really not a calling in, but someone's faking
Yeah,
it.
sure.
And the guy's mimicking the voice, and maybe it's my age, I don't know, but I like it.
Well,
That's good.
If you think about it,
These people.
that's a throwback to what radio was, and
Yes.
you and I are the same age, and in many ways that's a really appealing sound. And something Jack said earlier about personality radio. The thing that will save radio, and it still does today in this market, is personality. So people like Weeze, still very popular. People like Bob Lonsberry, popular. Beth Adams, when they hired Beth Adams at WXXI, the ratings in the morning went right through the roof. And they're not even that interested in ratings. They're a non-commercial radio station, but they are interested in serving the public, and they couldn't have hired a better person.
Yeah.
One of the other stories we missed today was you helped WDKX get on the air. And Rochester has a great legacy for we were one of the few markets to realize that African Americans were grossly underserved in radio. And Jack could have been the person to block them because it was competition. But you did just the opposite.
Well, my partner Bud and I were looking for a transmitter site all over Rochester for our FM station. We were on Midtown, and we were trying to get a better place, and we were negotiating with my old friend Ange Chiarella at Midtown. And
Ange Chiarella.
Yeah, good guy.
He knows it.
And so we were looking, and we found another site that we were considering right next door at the top of Xerox Tower. And we finally reached an agreement with my buddy Ange. We reached an agreement by pitching pennies.
No, you never told me this.
Yeah, that's another new one for you.
This is why he has to write the second book. Yeah, it is
I'm
the second.
writing another one,
He
but
is writing
it's
the
taken
second.
me a little longer. But so we pitched pennies, and we finally came to an agreement on the furniture and also the transmitter site on top of Midtown Tower. And he said it's the worst contract he ever signed. And so we had just talked to the folks next door at Xerox and said, there's a good one here too. So we called up Andy Langston and said, Andy, this is a great tower site for WDKX. So why don't you have lunch with the Wertheimers and us, and we'll set that up. And we did, and I'm very happy to say that it worked, and we were very fortunate to be able to allow them to have a great signal which covers the area that they serve.
Yep. And just so you know, a lot of people don't know this about WDKX, but there are a lot of ways to look at the ratings. Amongst 18 to 49-year-olds, WDKX is the #1 station in the market. By far. It's not even
Different
close.
music,
Yeah, and they do, again, it's about personality, and they have great personalities on, especially in the morning, and it shows you radio can still work. So.
Yes.
And Terry.
I wanted to tell you, I have never spent such an entertaining hour. Have you two ever thought of going on TV with?
It's being taped today.
They're taping it right now.
But why can't you do it as a study thing? Because it's wonderful.
Oh, I would bore him to tears.
Ask for stories like this, and we don't have them.
Actually what we've done is, and not just Jack and I, but Danny Guilfoyle.
Yeah.
Danny Guilfoyle has actually put together a series of interviews with some of the most important radio people, and they were done through St. John Fisher College, and they're housed at St. John Fisher College. And if you do watch Channel 4, it doesn't get a lot of play on cable, but every once in a while you'll see Jack and I on Channel 4, but you'll also see Dan Guilfoyle interviewing a lot of the great people like Ferdinand J. Smith and Larry White. And in fact, Larry White texted me right before I came over today. Larry White sent a text, and he was one of the guys that Jack hired.
Oh, yeah.
I wonder how many people here remember Al Siegel.
Al Siegel.
And
he had the big,
humidity
right,
today is...
big nasal voice, top rated, big.
Yeah.
And thank God for him for the blood bank.
He did the blood
Yeah.
work. That's right. You're absolutely right.
Yeah, and
he
that's-
was on at noon at WHEC, 1460.
And he was a newspaper man.
Yes, he was.
And he was a newspaper man who was so smart, but he didn't have a radio presence, but we forgave him. I was only 10 years, I remember I would sit in Grandpa's shoe store.
I grew up with him.
And Grandpa Marino would do anything to, everything had to stop to listen to Al Siegel, and that was the first time I ever understood the stock market.
Yeah.
He used to say the Dow Jones Industrial Average closed at 47 today, up
that's
2
right.
+1/4.
That's when the newspaper and the radio worked
Actually,
very
we're doing things together.
They worked together very well. And our Ohio station was a country station.
Yeah.
And one of the problems we faced there when we first bought the station was the highest rated show was one that my program director came in and said, we got to cancel it. I said, well, what's the show? It's our #1 show. He says, it's reading of obituaries.
The obits. Yeah. And in small markets around the USA, that's still a pretty big thing.
We
a
had
lot
to
of
keep
AM
that
radio
on.
stations. Yeah.
We kept it on for 6 months. We
take it
couldn't get rid of it. They wouldn't let us take it off the air.
Because a lot of those small markets were not served by a daily newspaper. So
Yeah.
if you wanted to be kept up, the funeral parlors would actually underwrite the cost too. So,
Oh, Salem, Ohio.
yeah.
That was an experience with the country and western songs, Long Back Battle, Get Out of My Hand, all that good stuff.
So Tony, you have a question.
Two questions that are
Sure.
related. You started by saying you have a love of baseball.
Yeah,
And I think
I do.
baseball games announced on radio are an incredible art form.
They're the best.
Did you ever consider that?
I would have considered it, but I never got an offer to do it. I would have loved to done that. Tom Decker was one of the best, the late Tom Decker here.
And we also had
Enfield, Jack Buck was
Buck,
here.
Joe Buck's dad.
But Joe,
Jack Buck?
Jack Buck, yeah. I would have loved to have done it, is the answer to your question, but there wasn't the opportunity.
And the second question is a business question. As you bought VOR and built it, you bought Wham and we're trying to build that.
Yes.
Did anybody ever keep track of what you were doing from an advertiser's perspective to make sure you just weren't switching the money from one station to the other?
Good question.
Great question. You could tell. Have you worked in media? Mr.
Yeah. Yes, they did, is the answer to your question.
They did track it, right?
Yeah, they did keep track because we didn't just switch pockets.
Right.
What we had was at the time a very unique philosophy, and that was that each station has its own personality, and we want our stations to compete just as violently with each other as they do with those not in our group. That's not the way it is today. my son sells at Wham. They sell them all
Everything. Yeah.
together.
And
But-
Tony, if you think about it, what he understood is branding. He
That's
really
right.
understood the power of the brand, and he was a great disciple of. Do you remember Al Rees and Jack Trout? The book called Positioning.
I still have their book.
He gave me the book when it came out in 1979. He gave me this book and he said, "You're going to want to make this a textbook in every class you ever teach from here on." And you were
Positioning,
absolutely
the
right.
battle of the mind.
There it is.
And you have to have a presence on the air so the person who listens knows what to expect and is not disappointed when they tune in. When you tune in, Wham, you expect to hear the news.
Right.
Remember WEZO? The easy listening. When you turn that in, you expect relaxed. You've got to give them that, or else you're going to lose them forever. And so it's service of customers that is the key to the whole thing. And it's unfortunately not being done the way it should be in a lot of cases today.
I agree. Unc?
Whatever happened to Joel Loy?
Joel Loy went to Washington.
Went to Washington. He worked with.
From Channel 13.
Worked at WTOP for a while, and then Joel.
What I'm asking is, we lived on Orange and Grape Street, and down the street from, well, the Pop College Club.
College Club, right.
Another house.
Right.
And then.
The Loys.
Or no, next door to College Club was Loiacono's family.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
And he grew up
That was.
Yeah, right.
Yeah, Joel passed away from pancreatic cancer. It was very quick, probably 20 years ago.
Quite a while. I don't.
But his brother Don is still in Rochester. Just moved back to Rochester and is doing work.
Yeah.
Still doing work with radio and TV.
Good for him.
Yeah, good family.
Yeah, well, he went from from radio and then to
Channel 13.
Channel 13. Yeah.
E station or E something.
Well, that was entertaining. Yeah, but he was at Channel 13 for a while, right? And
He worked with Bill O'Reilly.
yeah, he worked with Bill O'Reilly. Yeah, exactly.
Well, thank you. You've been a wonderful audience
You guys
here
are great.
today.
Isn't he the best?
And,
Huh?
thank you. You too. We got.